All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the 20th Annual Dallas Smythe Memorial Lecture, hosted by the School of Communication at Fraser University. My name is Enda Brophy. I teach in the School of Communication here at SFU, and it's my great pleasure to introduce this important event tonight. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that tonight's lecture takes place on unceded Coast Salish territory, including the traditional territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we thank them for hosting us this evening. Each year, the Smythe Memorial Lecture honors a critical scholar whose work has made a mark on the political economy of communication. This year's Smythe Lecture is a special affair, not only because it falls on St. Patrick's Day, but because tonight's lecture features one of our own, Dr. Yuezhi Zhao. This is an amply deserved honor for Dr. Zhao, which puts her in the company of many distinguished scholars who have delivered the lecture since 1993. Dr. Bob Hackett will introduce Dr. Zhao shortly. The lecture, entitled Dallas Smythe and China, an unfinished dialogue, will be followed by a Q&A moderated by Dr. Catherine Riley, and then refreshments in the tech gallery. But before that happens, I'd like to offer a background on this event and the scholar whose memory we're here to remember tonight. Dallas Smythe was a professor of communication here at SFU from 1976 until he passed away in 1992. He's now recognized globally as a leading scholar of communication processes, as well as a founding figure in the political economy of communication. Over 2 decades from his passing, Smythe's work is more relevant to the contemporary media landscape than ever. Smythe was born in Canada and trained as an economist in the United States. His life spanned the 20th century, from the anti-fascist era of his formative years to the struggle for a more equitable global information order during the Cold War, to the rise of neoliberalism in the 1980s. Smythe's political convictions only intensified. After getting a PhD in economics at Berkeley, Smythe began his career as a civil servant in 1937 and eventually served as chief economist of the Federal Communications Commission. Leaving the FCC for academic life after the war, Smythe established and taught his first course in the political economy of communication at the University of Illinois. Throughout his career as a civil servant, Smythe belonged to pacifist and social justice organizations, activity which eventually led to accusations of subversive conduct and disloyalty to the American government. It was in this context that Smythe returned to Canada to pursue his scholarship in 1963. His most influential work in communication studies would be developed during his time here at Simon Fraser. So before Bob offers his introduction, there are some individuals and institutions which deserve a hearty dose of thanks for making this lecture possible. This year's supporters include the School of Communication and the Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology. Thanks are also due to Chris Jaselnik and our tech team, who are taking care of the taping and uploading of tonight's lecture to the school website. And finally, a huge thanks to Brenda Baldwin, who isn't here tonight, but has been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make tonight's lecture and this week's possible. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Bob Hackett.
Okay, thank you, Enda. It's always a pleasure to introduce a student, an ex-student who has excelled, and I would say that probably none of our doctoral students from our program have excelled more than Yuezhi Zhao. I remember when Zhao arrived in our master's program in the 1980s as part of the first wave of students from China joining our graduate program. our department head at the time, Leora Salter, said, "Boy, if they're all like Zhao, bring them on." And Zhao was, I think, the first student, the doctoral student that I co-supervised or supervised, and she basically did it herself. And I thought, wow, if this is what graduate supervision is like, this is going to be easy. And unfortunately, hasn't always worked out that way since. But obviously, her promise was visible quite early in her career. Indeed, now, Zhao is firmly established as an important voice globally within communication studies, with a sort of meta-focus on communication, capitalism, and socialism. And her status has been underscored by several recent pieces in which her intellectual contribution and her trajectory have been profiled, and especially in the book Key Thinkers in Critical Communication, where Zhao's work is summarized along with only 11 other people. And those names include Chomsky, McChesney, Moscow, Murdoch, and Waskow. So that's a very distinguished company indeed. Some sense of the depth of Zhao's work can be gleaned just from mentioning the titles of her books. They include Sustaining Democracy, Journalism and the Politics of Objectivity, Media Markets and Democracy in China, based on her dissertation, Democratizing Global Media, Communication in China, Global Communications Towards a Transcultural Political Economy, Communication and Global Power Shifts, Communication and Class Divide in China, and undoubtedly others, some of which I understand are in Chinese, probably exclusively, as well as, I understand, about 150 articles in English and Chinese. And if I were to recite all of Zhao's accomplishments now, we wouldn't have time for the lecture. So instead, I'm just going to highlight a few things from the past couple of years. Zhao won a Dallas Smythe Award from the Union of Democratic Communication in 2013. Her achievements have also been recognized by an award from the International Communication Association in 2014. That was the Edwin C. Baker Award for the Advancement of Scholarship on Media Markets and Democracy. Her significant contribution in graduate teaching was recognized at the university level in 2015 with an Excellence in Leadership Award as part of the Dean's Awards for Excellence in Graduate Studies. And her scholarship continues to break new ground, most recently with an ambitious team project that integrates community building, research, and teaching in a fieldwork setting in Heiyang Village in China. And this project has included the founding in 2014 of the Heiyang Institute for Rural Studies, a research and community empowerment non-governmental organization. Zhao's been very involved, that's one example, but also in other aspects of academic institution building, most notably recently, of course, our own double master's program in global communications. So if I can conclude with a personal note, I think having somebody like Zhao as a colleague actually makes it easier for an old geezer like me to retire. I've been filling out the forms actually today to formalize my retirement from SFU in a couple of years' time. And I will complete those forms after Zhao delivers what I'm sure will be an excellent lecture. So Zhao, my career is in your hands. No pressure or anything, but without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Zhao. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. Let me just say this. I can't wait to sign my retirement form as well, knowing that there are many not Zhao's, brilliant students there in the audience. So thank you very much. Thank you, and the whole SFU team, School of Communication team, for organizing this event. Also, thank you, Bob, for that. Introduction that almost make me cry. But we have work to do. But before that, I do want to thank this School of Communication for accepting me twice. First as a student, then as a faculty member. And so this is a place I'm going to stay forever, I know that. Okay, so the talk is called Dallas Smythe and China Unfinished Dialogue. I have 95 slides, so hold your breath. And I will read it through. So very fast, but Catherine will keep your time, right? Okay, so number one. Actually, don't look. I will tell you the story. So it was 86, Bob mentioned my arrival. So I arrived here, 21-year-old, in the MA program, and like the rest of every new student, you check out the professors. And I asked the first and only Chinese student from mainland who were here. I said, okay, of all the professors, which one you should study with? And then she told me, Swallow Chen, said, stay away from Dallas Smythe. He had strange, terrible ideas about the Cultural Revolution. And before I figured out what to do, because I was just fresh off the boat, Dallas had reached out to me through his famous free lunch. He invited me for free lunch through another student whose name is Amy Liu. So I went to Dallas free lunch, and guess what? I got a manuscript, which is called Of the Bicycles, What? And as Guback, one of Dallas Smythe's students who ended up publishing his biography, was saying the piece gained legendary status among his peers, even it was not published during his lifetime. So Guback eventually published it. So during, while Smythe was teaching at SFU, he made 2 trips to China, one in the late 1971, early 72, 5 years after the Cultural Revolution. Another in late 78 and 79 to study what he called ideology, technology, and the Chinese struggle to build socialism. He interviewed officials, academics during his first visit, and he concluded that even though proletarian politics were in command, but our common cultural heritage of capitalist thinking continued to inhibit the Chinese from seeing the political status or the political nature of techniques and the technology. So Dallas was really worried. So he wrote, he had a gut feeling that this could be a problem in the Chinese struggle for socialism. And it was more than a question of scholarly concern. So he wrote a report. The report was called Of the Bicycles, What? And he submitted to the Chinese authorities. I guess it was the first secretary in Ottawa, the Chinese embassy. And he presented himself as a member of the international socialist movement family rather than a detached objective scholar. So the article called Of the Bicycles, What? Posed a fundamental question about a choice between production for capitalist accumulation and production for what Smythe called collective social needs. Thus began the historical encounter between the scholarly practices of Dallas Smythe as a leading Western critical communication scholar and the Chinese struggle for socialism. And this is how I see the connection and see the dialogue. The scholarly West, not just scholarly, but in this case, scholarly West, and then the Chinese struggle for socialism. Of course, Smythe never got a reply from the Chinese authorities. And that's something he just couldn't get away with, I think. That's why I think he tried me. But the indirect response from the post-Mao China has been a thunderous, of course, cars, right? My peasant brother right now had 2 cars. Along with all the good, bad, and the ugly dimensions of transnational consumer capitalism, and what Raymond Williams called mobile privatization. And in this context, communication and culture, the wide range of communication from internet to everything, culture, has become post-2008 China's pillar industry. Actually, last night I was reading a manuscript by a Dan Schiller student, Hong Yu, whose book was called Networking the Nation. She was detailing all the post-2008 CCP effort to build the computer and the communication industry as the industry that will save China and hopefully save global capitalism from its crisis. So, yes, consumer capitalist excess with Chinese characteristics. Many of you know this. I know some of the double degree students from China feel that once they are in Canada, they got deprived of shopping online. They told me so don't hide, right? Alibaba, the China's #1 internet company, right, invented this shopping event. Well, in the West, in the US, they have Black Friday, right? We in China got to have something equivalent, even bigger. So he invented Double 11, November 11th. They call it a single day, right? Single, one. And he called this the Global Shopping Festival. And just during one day, last November 11th, of the 7 hours of shopping, the volume of trade or the sales revenue was already bigger than the 5 days of online shopping in the US combined. So there was a lot of boost. This is the growth it starts from 2009, goes to last year. Huge. This is the volume, domestic consumption. So as I said, 7 hours, 45 minutes, and 42 seconds, Tmall had generated 41.7 billion in sales in Chinese, surpassing the total volume of 5 days of US Thanksgiving online sales. And the New York Stock Exchange made a special bell ringing ceremony for this event. And Jack Ma said at the event, Double 11 started in China, but it will become a global festival. It could be held in Tokyo, Paris, New York within the next 5 years, and should be held for at least 100 years, longer than Alibaba's life. So he knows the corporate life will end, but consumer capitalism will go on forever with Chinese style. Here's the second case. This is not for laugh. So you have the excesses of make everything a commodity. And guess what? Your kidney, right? So in the black market, there was a story, and it broke the heart of a lot of Chinese, but it's true. A 17-year-old sold his right side kidney to, of course, a black society for the equivalent of $45,100 to buy an iPhone and an iPad too. This is how far it has gone. And to more surprise to me is when I read the news story. The news story had nothing, well, it's a commentary to think about consumerism or anything. It's just, well, you know, a bad educate. This is how far it has gone in terms of commodification, in terms of, yes, the worship of the latest model of iPhone. Actually, for myself, I wrote an article trying to follow Dallas with the title of the mobile phones what? Well, in this case, of the mobile phones, you have the rest of life condemned without a kidney, another kidney, basically, for this 17-year-old. So that's the excess part. This part, I'm going to look at the struggles over the future of China within the CCP and beyond. So along with China's capitalistic integration come with all the social struggles that have been part of the history of global capitalism. And the political economy and communication scholars have tried very hard to document this. In fact, Smythe had already predicted this in his dependency road. He said, and I'm quoting here, assuming as I do that Mao Zedong correctly predicted the zigs and the zags of China's struggle towards socialism, it seems obvious that the fuel is being accumulated, which will power a later phase of class struggle taking off from where the Cultural Revolution ended. And how correct he has been. Elite and the popular struggles have been intensively in post-2008 China as China's ICT-driven and export-oriented model becomes unsustainable. Actually, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the Cultural Revolution, next month, almost, yeah, May. And many are speaking of the specter of the Cultural Revolution from the left, from the right. It's a lot of people are talking about the Cultural Revolution. Only official, of course, you won't have a commemoration of the Cultural Revolution. At the top level, you have the elite struggles. In the West press, you read it as a power struggle. But underneath this power struggle, there are a series, what I would call, or Smythe in his writing called two-line struggles. Of course, not everything can be reduced to the two-line, i.e. socialism versus capitalism. You have, most obvious in the past few years, the rise and the fall of the Chongqing model in our almost Hollywood-style high political drama, some of that of you might still remember, which ends with a micro-blogged trial of Bo Xilai on a corruption charge, right? Then you have localized workers, farmers' struggles, environmental protests, and the intensifying geopolitical struggle over what's China. Not long ago, a very leading China scholar, he's a China scholar, but he does other things, Arif Derek, did a talk in Vancouver, and he was saying that even the term China was invented by the West. But once it was invented by the West, the Chinese take it very seriously. Now there's battle over which part, inside and outside China, right? So nationalistic struggles. Now, in terms of elite struggle, I just want to highlight briefly from the Chongqing model to the China dream. Of course, the Chongqing model was totally discredited because it's associated with Bo Xilai, right? But under the Chongqing model, there are a number of things that almost foreshadow what's going on now in terms of the policy. One is, the idea of common prosperity. The other is mass line, revival of mass line as a means of achieving political accountability. The other is what Bo Xilai called seeing red, seeing socialist songs, right? Remember the communist history. Then strike black, a law and order campaign that restores public security and curb mafia-style capitalism. Basically, the excesses of bureaucratic capitalism. Then there's the slogan of Green Chongqing, right? I emphasize on the environmental sustainability. Of course, Bo Xilai lost his power. Xi Jinping came to power. That leads to the CCP's 18th Party Congress compromise, which on the one hand mobilizes socialist legacies, at the same time also deploys neoliberal strategies, which happen to be the title of one of my articles. So again, with Bo Xilai, Xi Jinping's policy, or the new leadership's policy, has continuities. First, it reaffirmed the Mao period as part of China's search for socialism. This was very important because when many try to say the first 30 years was wrong, only the Deng era was correct, Xi Jinping said, no, these two parts were all the same search for socialism, okay? That's important for many people. Second, Xi Jinping articulated the China dream, which I don't have time to elaborate. Third, the mass line. And of course, anti-corruption campaign. Anti-corruption, you see heads roll, a lot of officials, every day almost. And if you put it in a kind of class struggle terms, this is crackdown on the excesses of bureaucratic capitalists, right, within the party. Also, ecological civilization. Yes, Chinese like to use big terms. The term never got reported in the Western media, but the party did put forward a very progressive in a way, ecological agenda. Also the new developmental mantra of innovation, coordination, green, open, sharing. And also, yes, new efforts at cultural screening. No Twitter, no Facebook, no Google. There's a lot of complaint in the West, of course, censorship, all that. But from the party's point of view, this is trying to strengthen China's national control of internet. Of course, you'll have a lot of victims. Myself is one, actually. One of my Communication in China book, after being translated, has been held, can be published. So at the same time, on the one hand, the party is pushing for developing the cultural industry along the commodification lines. At the same time, Xi Jinping is critiquing excessive commercialism. Then you have workers, farmers, economic, social justice struggles as China rises. As many of us know, China's post-Mao boom was really based on the defeat or the disintegration of the urban working class, and also the creation of 275 million migrant workers as super exploit Simon proletarians, right? Because they are Simon proletarian because they still have rural residence status. So the struggle has really been many-headed hydra, right? This is the Western term, the autonomous term, many-headed hydra. The nature of struggle is everywhere, every day, right? You have old working class struggles in the Rust Belt against privatization, and some of the struggle has been so very violent. In one case, basically you had workers in a mob beat to death the privatizing agent of a capitalist, and the party couldn't say much. Some people were saying, well, this is crazy, but some were saying, well, because of the socialist moral economy claims, this claim made the Chinese workers iron fist, especially powerful. So there was some moral economy claim there. Also, of course, you have the new working class struggle, most famous being the Foxconn mass suicides. In this case, as a communication scholar, I will interpret this as suicide as a means of communication, really desperate means of communication. Some people have written about it. Also, pension and other forms of social welfare struggle, which I will show you how I got involved myself. Also, anti-new closure struggles. Notwithstanding, in the West, a lot of this struggle is being framed in Western liberal terms, like in the famous Wukan case a few years ago, where villagers were fighting against corruption and during an election time. So it all become, electoral politics. But it is important once again to look at the socialist moral economy claim. So rather than aiming at regime changes, the majority of this struggle aim at compelling the CCP to fulfill its revolutionary promises. So yes, you have the liberal claims. This is one of those, my favorite photos, play with the French Revolution, but it's a man, muscle, almost he's a muscle builder, I think. And then you have anti-corruption appeals. Punish corruption, return my land, right? This is from Wukan, I think. Then, this is local protest, always say appeal to the central government. The emperor is good, only the local officials are bad, right? So the disjuncture between national government and the local government allows spaces for protest, but you present it in such a way, it's not threatening to the regime, right, to the government. Also, this one, again, CCP, please save me, dedicate to the CCP's birthday. This is, somebody just don't want to be, the house doesn't want to be demolished. There's the Maoist discourse, right? Wherever there's operation, there's resistance, there's struggle. 哪里有压迫，哪里就有反抗，就有斗争。There's another one. On the ground, they say, it's illegal demolition or illegal dismantling of houses. And you put up, all you need is put up a Chairman Mao. Long live Chairman Mao. CCP is dear or good. This one is also very interesting, saying being dispossessed, demolished after Fansheng. Fansheng is, many of you in the West in the 60s read the book, Fansheng by this very well-known Western scholar, right? Missing Chairman Mao. The international must be realized. Here's how I myself got involved, and yes, thanks to the SFU project. So during the SFU-CUC research team, during the project, one team member from Colombia, Rebecca, she wanted to interview China's famous coming film projectors, because those people are famous in the 70s, 80s, taking film to the peasants. So I said, sure, I can find one. Well, yes, I found one. Without realizing that, this whole film projectors, in my own province, home province, about 100 of them were struggling for their pension. And now they got a scholar who is willing to listen to them. So before I realized, they stole my, Christmas time, last Christmas. They came to me, they want me to listen to them, and before long I wrote a 20-page in Chinese report. Now that report has been submitted through, CUC connections to the National Film Bureau chief. We will see what happened. Another has been submitted to the provincial government. So that's the danger of doing research in China. Try to be objective. it's hard for me because the film projector that I first approached was from my own village, and I knew him, I admire him. I said, wow, what a beautiful job. Now it turned out that he didn't have any pension. The state just forgot about the first 30 years. And guess how I framed my report? I said, yes, Xi Jinping had already said that, the 30 years should not be disjunctured. So by honoring these people, you are honoring Xi Jinping's line. So that's how I try to appeal to the officials. Okay, urban middle-class environmental protest. The environmentalism of the discontent, or some of those that are not in my backyard type. This undermines local official legitimacy, but also fitting into the official ecological civilization agenda. Again, my own role. I got involved by the SFU-based this group, CCICED, a high-profile Western advisory group on China's environment. I guess, when China become the workshop of the world, some of the Western governments feel a bit guilty, or they want to make sure China supposedly won't repeat the West past. So they organize this with World Bank, CEDA, Canada CEDA, organize this big council hosted at SFU, and they each year will give advices to the Chinese government on environmental issues. And a few years ago, environmental protest fueled by social media actually become so out of control that the Chinese state really got worried. So this SFU-based group launched a project called a special policy study on media and public participation policies on promoting China's green development. I was recruited as 3 of the foreign scholars, and then we have 3 domestic scholars, and then we have a team leader on both sides, and when the 2 of them fight, I end up trying to negotiate between them, and then the British leader asked me, Zhao, which side are you on? Then I said, I'm on the side of trying to get this report in the best shape possible. So that was successful, actually. Another SFU link. Then you have the nationalistic protests, mobilizations. And again, it's very complicated with strong ethnic and religious dimensions in Xinjiang and Tibet. But to the extent that, as I said earlier, even what is China is being fought over, right? The US still expects China's subordination, especially in the Pacific, Asia-Pacific. The US old and new allies in Asia, such as Japan, Philippines, a lot of countries, are continuously engaging in, territorial disputes with China, sometimes China provoking, sometimes the other side. And to the extent that this now is the domestic dimension, the PRC claims the equality of all nationalities with its borders, right? So nationalistic protest remains a powerful challenge against the CCP's claim to defend China's territorial integrity, national dignity, and sustain the equality of all nationalities within China. And this can be especially threatening when it is intertwined with social struggle. Again, I'm not going to elaborate, but one thing is very important. That is not all nationalistic are anti-government, right? Just earlier this year, there was a huge social media-based protest, and it has to do with Taiwan's, electoral politics. The government probably is only too happy that, the young Chinese internet users were organized on that line. Also, another interesting, and I have a bit like a survey data secondhand, the US is looming larger and larger in the articulation of Chinese nationalism. For example, 18% of people's daily articles link nationalism with the US, i.e., when you talk about Chinese nationalism or patriotism in Chinese, you mention US. But by the 2000s, 34%. So, then, you have the media and the intellectual field, what I would call the return of the repressed, i.e. the leftist discourse. Remember when I first came here, I think Swallow was right in warning me not to be close to Dallas. Leftism, the term left is scary. You don't want to be labeled as left. But gradually, since the late 90s, neoliberal dominance in media and the intellectual fields are being challenged at both elite and popular levels. And in this case, transnational intellectual media flows have been pivotal. Simon Fraser has been pivotal. I've been sending back students, visiting scholars to the battlegrounds in China's intellectual struggle, seriously. So what you have is what I call the resilience and the growing influence of new left intellectuals, despite attacks and the marginalization efforts of right-wing media and their favorite intellectuals. For example, actually one of my articles was about accusation against Wang Hui, one of China's leading left-wing intellectuals, for plagiarism, whereas in fact that was not the case. And Wang Hui ended up winning a very prestigious award together with Habermas. And he's now a leading China National People's Political Consultative Congress delegate. Each year he put proposals. Last year was about raising the status or the welfare of migrant workers. This year is about the school teachers, right? So there are a number of key positions I don't think I have time to go into. I will just skip over if people are interested. What I'm saying is, even from this perspective, Dallas Smythe has something to offer. And I have myself write about it. That is, if the Earth's bio capacities cannot accommodate the rise of China, as aspiring to Western levels of consumerism, then Dallas Smythe insisted on the necessity of transforming capitalist production relations, assumes more urgency today, not only for Chinese, but also for an ecologically sustainable future for humanity as a whole. And I'm shamelessly quoting myself. In my 2008 book, I said, if socialism is the establishment of a society with the working people as the primary subjects, then perhaps not only the party's official slogans per se, but also their reappropriation by various Chinese social forces and the unfolding societal processes of subordinating both the state and the market to the social needs of the working people are what the struggle for socialism in China is all about. It's a mouthful, but you can see, right, you have flourishing neo-Maoist, other socialist discourse of all kinds. You have nascent new working class communication and culture alliances between workers and organic intellectuals. Many are my friends. You also have emerging new rural reconstruction movement, which I hope I will see a bit more. So during his trip to China, Dallas explained to his host about how one-way television, the Western type, really it's embedded in capitalist ideology. And he was talking about, the need for the Chinese, advise the Chinese to come up with a two-way electronic 大字报 system, right? As an updated version of the big character posters. But I think today, as many netizens, online call for, they call it a cultural revolution in the new era, to carry out what they call ideological struggles, to criticize revisionism or capitalist restoration, or to discuss the problem of continuous revolution. I believe Dallas Smythe will feel at least partially redeemed. Yes, a 2012 survey reported, a scholarly survey just published in Pacific Affairs, that 40.16 students still self-identify themselves as liberals. It shows the impact of neoliberalism and liberalism. But to me, the interesting part is there's the other 60%. And I think there's a sign that the new left is winning the hearts and minds of the young generation. And even right-wing media, for example, this Nanfang Weekend or Nanfang People's Weekly had this as its cover a few years ago, 2013, saying that, this is rising of left youth. And here you have a cover called My Proletarian Life. Now I'm too left, the world is too right-wing. We are people, a multitude of people, okay? The proletariat. Now I just want to shift gear to another part. Capitalism, urban-rural divide in China. It is widely believed the city is where the good life is, and also even today, even though the urban proletariat are missing, there's still a wide belief that the revolution will be urban, right? No matter what revolution. But instead of taking capitalism, industrialization, modernization, or urbanization as a universal and inevitable process that underpinning much of theorization about communication, I want to move beyond Smythe a bit to advance a radical de-Westernized perspective that foregrounds the urban-rural relationship, the agrarian question, and the peasantry as a social force. I was joking with Enda that when we saw the poster, did you see there are only 3 stars? They're supposed to have 4 stars surrounding the big star, which is the Communist Party. I think the peasant star is missing. This is just for the fun of it. So the entire enterprise of communication studies, especially the post-Cold War media and democracy literature, which I grew up with. I studied with Bob. I wrote my first, co-authored my first book with Bob, Sustaining Democracy. Now I realize it's a little bit narrow, but also rather urban-centric and West-centric. Of course, the Cold War inflicted history of American mainstream communication actually did put the first Third World peasantry at the center of the communication development paradigm. But I think it has a very narrow political agenda. The idea is, yes, China has gone communism or Vietnam because the peasants were hungry and the communists become, the radical forces. So what we need to do to prevent this, prevent the red revolution is have the green revolution, right? So it's have the communication development. That's why Weber Schramm write his communication development, right? So the entire communication development literature did deal with the peasantry, but in a very instrumental way, in a very politicized way. So even today, I think the field is still bifurcated. You have variants or updated versions of ICT4D for the rural and the slum inner city poor in the communication and the development literature. And then you have the social media using urban middle class as agency of democracy in the new media and democracy literature. And we have known so much from the Middle East, the Twitter revolutions, right? And there you see the squares, the revolution is urban. So I want to be going radical in the sense of going back to my peasant roots. Below, I want to forward 3 key differences between China and West in a longer historical framework. That is, moving beyond the rise of capitalism in the West as the historical ground zero in much of the political economy of communication literature. At the same time, without falling into a kind of nativist and a cultural essentialist, all those traps, right? So this is a little bit dense, but after this, I'm done. The first is historical differences between Western and Chinese paths of development. So historical capitalism, as it developed out of Europe, is urban-centric, and it predicted upon an explorative relationship between urban and rural, or the town and country, right? Marx wrote about it, Raymond Williams wrote about it. And here, we can enter imperialism and the colonial exploitation of Africa and the Americas through slavery and the dispossession of First Nations as the extension of this exploitative urban-rural relationship beyond Europe, right? And rightfully just pay tribute to the land. This is part of the story, right? We stand on First Nations land. This is part of the dispossession of the Aboriginal people here. On the contrary, I'm not saying, Chinese passes groceries. Maybe there's something like that. On the contrary, throughout the Chinese history up to the Ming-Qing dynasties, there had always been a mutually nurturing relationship between the town and the countryside. It was this fundamental difference in the urban-rural relationship between China and the West, or the inward-looking nature of China's market economy, which Adam Smith imagined to be the ideal market economy, actually, that made historical China a non-capitalist and no-imperialist rural society, or non-capitalist market economy, okay? Of course, there are 2 qualifications. First is this mutually nurturing relationship was not the result of some static Asiatic model or some essentialist Chinese culture, but the result of Chinese peasantry's cyclical struggles, right, rebellions. Second, this relationship was destroyed with China's forced integration with global capitalism through imperialist invasions. So that was no longer, this relationship is no longer there. But there is, because of that difference, there is a historical difference between Chinese and other third world paths to modernity and the modern nation-state building process, precisely because it was the Chinese peasantry that suffered the most in global capitalist order. The last century, the Chinese peasantry got mobilized as the revolutionary force under a CCP that challenged West-centric first, then even Soviet-centric communist orthodoxy through a land revolution, right, through the Mao's mass line. Even during the Mao era, Mao's commune system, in which I grew up with, in the commune system that was created, also sustains some form of mutually nurturing relationship between the urban and the rural. And it is in this context that the rhetoric of worker-peasant alliance assumed real political economic significance. Even during the reform era, that they have revised the Constitution a lot, the 1982 Constitution still retain the state as a state that has worker-peasant alliance, urban-rural integration as the Chinese state's power base. Okay, so two differences already. One is historical, the other is the passage to modern. The third is the contemporary differences between neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics. That's David Harvey's term. Many Chinese won't accept it. And also neoliberalism with southern characteristics. That's Yuezhi Zhao talk about, i.e. China, put it bluntly, the difference between China and India or China and Brazil, okay? It was precisely the socialist legacy of peasant land ownership that has made possible for super exploitation in China, for good or bad. Rural China cross-subsidized the migrant workers in China's China as workshop of the world, right? It absorbed the so-called externalities of neoliberal capitalist market economy. Instead of being settled in urban slums, the migrants returned to the countryside. They themselves work in the cities. Their elders were being taken care of in the countryside. Their children were in the countryside. So you don't need a full salary to feed the Chinese working class, right? Because the countryside still feeds them. And when they were laid off, when they have their arms chopped off due to machinery or whatever, they return to the countryside to recover. So also rural China cross-subsidized the migrant workers to serve as the maids, waitress, breakfast makers, or the service sector workers in the cities that make city life so good in Beijing, in Shanghai, right? So, but these contemporary differences, which I just mentioned too, are no longer sustainable. First, the crisis of export-led growth in the post-2008 era. Second, intensified working class peasant struggles, and also ecological crisis, right? Ecological crisis, employment crisis, urban disease, the smog, right? We have double-degree students ask me, Zhao, can we take the class to Xinjiang? I said, no, not in Beijing, but Xinjiang is not safe either. There's no escape, right? Along with food safety concerns have emerged to create a neo-ruralism, a new way of thinking, and a new down-to-the-countryside movement for livable countryside and organic agriculture. I'm not saying this is a massive movement. I'm not saying this is the return of Mao's, down to the countryside. But a lot of people are going back, including me. So here I'm borrowing from Raymond Williams, who has a book title called Resources for Hope. And I'm going to just give you an inventory from the field of resources for hope. As a continual agrarian civilization that has gone through a violent peasant revolution in the 20th century, and one that still has worker-peasant alliance as its constitutionally sanctioned power base, I believe China has the resource of hope. And for that reason, I believe everywhere you have resources of hope. So this is an inventory I just collect from my home county. You have infrastructure. This is a reservoir that was built 1,700 years ago. during the kingdom of three kingdoms. And this marks the different times of repairment. That one belongs to, 1700 years ago. And I climb up, and the wall is so good. You don't need to do a facial, just wash it. It's so soft. Very high up in the mountains. This is another infrastructure built during the Mao's era. This one actually was designed by my husband's grandfather. Actually, I know the grandfather before my husband. He was returned engineer, retired in the city, worked as engineering for the state, and then returned to the villages. And he basically voluntarily built almost all the local infrastructures, the roads, the bridge, and the cultural halls. This is the cultural hall. Built in the 70s, now it's called literally the cultural hall, but the Communist Party has a name for it, or internal, the Zhejiang Provincial Party has called, it's the Red Church. With the inclusion of Christian religion, the party want to regain cultural leadership in the countryside. So now this is where you have all the big cultural events. This is another infrastructure. Don't think this is as your Vancouver metro. This is China's high-speed highway. No, high-speed train. This is a map of China's high-speed train. You can see this is a part of China. It has not reached the west part, but I know in Xinjiang they are building it. On this corner, they are building it. This is, if you talk about collective goods, Dallas Smythe. Of the bicycles, what? Here's the answer. High-speed trains. And I think Dallas will be happy. Because, and interestingly, the railway industry was the only industry that was not privatized until very, very, very late. Until just a few years ago, as after a major train accident when the liberals, transnational capitalists, organized rally behind against the last ministry of the planned economy era. Okay, this is, yes, I was too excited to take it because just last December, I was able to take this train from Beijing down home to my own home county, 8 hours, super comfortable. And so that's infrastructure. I have chosen wisely to show that this is the Asian one, this is the Maoist era, and this is the Deng's era. Infrastructure. Traditional knowledge, I know Pat will like to hear this. I show this one book, Knowledge That Coming Back Full Circle. This is a book called Farmers of 40th Century. In the year of 1911, a US agroeconomist took the boat with his wife, traveled all the way to East Asia, China, Korea, and Japan, study sustainable agriculture, knowing that the US agriculture business is not going to be sustainable. So he wrote this book. His wife published it after he passed away. And then 100 years later, 2011, a visiting scholar went to University of Illinois somewhere and translated it. And the book got published in China. And the visiting scholar was a translator, but the actual person who was responsible to know this book and to get it, to fund the translation was actually a local official from my hometown. This guy used to be the propaganda department official of my home county. Now he's deputy mayor of my home city. And he was the one who discovered the book, and then make arrangement for the book to be translated. Now this book is a very popular book in China. So the book describes organic, basically agricultural knowledge, the kind that my father do or I grow up with. Now the book, I heard that was a manual in some US circles for organic farming. Now the book has traveled full circle back to China. So this is what I mean by coming back full circle. This is, again, something you discover as legacy of the past era. This is somebody's bedroom front. Here you have Mao's statement of 1919. I won't have time to read, but it's a good slogan anyway. Then another intellectual heritage. Chinese version of the bicycles, what? You bet, when Dallas sent me the article, I tried to get published in China, right? I tried for 30 years. Finally, 2 years ago, it got published. Not by Communication Journal. The Communication Journal, I tried to say it's too radical because it mentioned about Cultural Revolution. So I tried another journal, and this journal is even more influential. It's China's leading social science journal. So yes, Chinese version. And everyday production practices, this is how you do fertilizer. This is the community cultural heritage. Again, I don't have time to go into. Here's everyday knowledge production, the role of rural return intellectual. This is a elementary school teacher. He has, in this room, he has written tons of books, and he's editing the village clan book that has lasted for more than 600 years. And you need to write a preface for this book. And it's a very prestigious job, and so I got to ask to do. And so I become the first woman in 650 years to write a preface for this book. And I was very nervous, and I asked Xiaoxin to help me too, right? But the point is, we have some idea that, the old people are useless, right? Or at least some ageist will think that way. No, not in China. Actually, the room is, I show you, is inside this cultural hall I show you. It's the public place, and these are the two old men I work with on oral history projects. This is even more interesting. This old man is like 89 or sometime, like that. He's a retired teacher, very well-known retired teacher. The current party secretary of my home county was his former student. He would use this wall to publicize news, write news, early on for many years. Eventually, they put this on, so he couldn't use it anymore. Then he moved to another place, and he hid this from his daughters. Until I went there, the daughter said, "What? You have been doing this for another year?" This is the kind of cultural activity that's going on. He enjoyed doing this, and these are all news, national news, and this is a community hall, and he's doing this. He has a lot of fun. These are, volunteers repair roads, and a 75-year-old, 80-year-old grandfather repair the roads. This road leads to the reservoir, which I visited. These are younger volunteers of Western style. Yes, and this is the Socialist New Countryside, beautiful countryside project launched by the state. But what I'm trying to say is, with or without the state, there are statist projects, there are initiatives came from the ordinary people. Here you have a very strong presence of the state. This is state propaganda in the village. Unity is power. I think that's not a bad, solidarity is power. It's not a bad slogan. This is another event I went, a spring festival show, and this woman is a young elected village council leader. And this show was broadcast this year actually to 21 countries through the Ministry of Culture's online or IPTV platform, and this is a village woman, okay? This guy on this side was a former mayor, and after his retirement, he returned to the country and he transformed a whole village. He said, it took 40 years for me to become from a peasant to become a mayor, and it took 4 hours for me to return as a peasant. And he did that. And the party now, actually, this is the People's Daily article. The party now is encouraging this. This is a resurgence of new forms of collective rural economy. In the back is the high-speed railway, which I took. Here you have farmers working. Guess what? They are not planting grain. Grain has become too cheap with our Canadian export, right? So they are planting flowers. This is what they envision. And in order for this kind of agricultural or rural tourism to happen, you need to have patterns. You have a whole plot. You can't divide it up anymore, right? So as a result of that, this village, which is not too far, just almost next door to my own native village, have begun the recollectivization process. Okay? So they are rebuilding the collective economy, for good or bad. So emerging forms of micro-urban rural economic community. This is only one form. There are many other forms. There are pilot projects all over. In one case, you have the kind of in the West, what is it, urban, rural, community supporting agriculture type of projects. Some of these are more radical in China, actually. So, I'm getting to the end. I'm not putting bets on any particular outcome in China, but we must have an open mind in terms of seeing where it's going. This time I'm not signing Smythe, I'm signing Yuezhi. So no conclusion, only ongoing action. I don't know, my time is way over, right? No? Okay. Then I'm going to show you some of my own stuff. So Dallas, no conclusion, only ongoing action. Dallas was well known for linking knowledge and research to policy and practice. So he was not born radical, but well known for becoming more radical as he got older. That's become counterclockwise, right? So I'm trying. After having encountered all the good, bad, ugly of Western Chinese intellectual worlds, I've become compelled to be more radical by going back to my roots. I heard that radical means going back to roots. Below are pictures of my scholarly activities that I'm leading in China. This is a conference I organized. Again, more conferences. This is going back to literally where I was born, to have my students writing what? Consensus on ecological socialism. It does get circulated somewhere. And then yes, as Bob mentioned, we built this Heyang Rural Research Institute. This is the grand opening of that institute. I got some local officials there, a lot of villagers. This is the SFUC team. We go there to do some field work. We try to really connect the global with the local. We did a lot of ethnographic interviews, focus group. This is the backside of my Rural Research Institute. Even that piece of furniture, I got somebody made it for me. This is where before the furniture was even polished, I organized an oral history project. And you can see they are all men. And I said, hey, where's the other half of the village? But you got to start somewhere, right? Because first I asked the local officials, elders, to recommend people. So that's what they got. But no worry, I'm getting women. I got a lot of women. Okay, this is me playing the local host of a lot of tourists come to my Heyang Research Institute. This is the best picture I have. Two kids had taken over this table. One time when I go and he said, hey, this is our study desk, get away. I said, hey, this is my desk. So when I'm not there, they are using this desk. And these people are not even from the village because they're from outside this is the beautiful socialist countryside. Again, terrace field used for now agricultural tourism. They grow things, but also for tourism purpose. This is me pointing to utopian. Actually, the words there are utopian. Did you see there? 3 words? Not too excited, it's a brand name. But it's okay. I talked to the township leader who started this. I said, how many advertisers are you going to have? He said, only 3. The rest will be for good slogans. So as Thomas Gubeck said upon receiving his Smythe Award in '96, he said the Dallas Smythe Award keeps his contribution alive and fresh in our mind. I think the Smythe lecture has the same mission. So today, more than ever, I think we need to follow the footsteps of Dallas Smythe to pursue radical scholarship in the international spirit, and not to leave the Chinese struggle for socialism to the Chinese in this era of planetary capitalism. Today, more than ever, we need to overcome our own fears, to be vigilant against calculated manipulations, racist, sexist, and other forms of repressive ideologies in this time of uncertainty, anxiety, and global turbulence. Because it's so easy to come up with all kinds of fears. Right now, of course, one fear is China rising, right? Of course, another fear is China collapsing. Also, finally, more than ever, I think we at SFU School of Communication need to carry on the Smythe's insistence on linking research and knowledge with policy and practice, locally, globally. The point is to change the world, right? One student at a time, at the cost of free lunch. So that's my talk. Thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you so much, Zhao. This has been a real pleasure. I would like to invite you all to ask, not all of you, but I would like to invite questions from the audience. There's a microphone in the center here. If you have a question, can I ask you to please approach? And I will let you moderate.
Well,
And then I'll come
okay,
in.
sure, yeah.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
What were the terrible things that Dallas believed about the Cultural Revolution? And what have you concluded from meeting, I'm sure, many people who participated or were victims in that period? It seems important to know about the Cultural Revolution because it always comes up when you talk to people in China as what they're afraid of.
Right.
They don't want to go back to that kind of situation. So I'm curious to know, you'll give me a different view, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. What are the terrible things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the most horrible thing, or the number one narrative that's being produced after the Cultural Revolution was the prosecution of the intellectuals, right? It's the ruthless beating to death, or the wild violence that's unleashed on the intellectuals. And so to the extent that, there's that prosecution, that harassment is a weak term, I guess. So the crackdown, the suppression of the intellectuals. But what I think now, with as time passes on, is that that's only one part of the Cultural Revolution. Even though that's the part that's most written about, and the part that is most horrible. There are other parts of the Cultural Revolution. For example, in the countryside, we got basic education so that, legacies of Cultural Revolution like me can be educated. Where you have, in the countryside, you have a basic medical system so that where with my grandmother, who gave birth to 12 children, only 2 survived. My mother gave birth to 6, only 5 survived, right? So these are the differences. I think that as not only the intellectuals who are speaking, but others were also speaking, people began to see the different dimensions of Cultural Revolution. Also, even about the beating, the prosecution of the intellectuals, people were saying, okay, it's a complicated situation. There are the red guards, but then there are different kinds of red guards. And it's the ones that, the red guards who are unleashed by certain conservative forces who are went out beating up intellectuals. Whereas in fact, many workers, farmers were trying to protect intellectuals. So I think now, with hindsight, I think people are becoming more, open-minded in terms of the different dimensions of the Cultural Revolution. So that's all I can say. Yes, the horrible things, and yes, that narrative has been promoted most widely, most powerfully, and maybe the only narrative that got to know in the West. But now, both inside China and also outside, there is a more diverse story about the Cultural Revolution. So again, on this, I think Zhou Enlai was right when we talk about the French Revolution. It's too early to tell, right? And so even now, I think the party still won't allow open discussion of the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah, I want to carry on where Andrew just started to take you, because in Inner Mongolia, one of the things that we discovered is that some of the teachers who had come from Beijing to Inner Mongolia and actually were persecuted and were Hans, in the persecution of Mongolians who were supposed to have been involved in some kind of separatist movement to create a Inner Mongolia party and would join with Mongolians outside the country and all this sort of thing. It was the Hans they went after. And yet those people looked upon the Cultural Revolution in an ambivalent sort of way, I think I'd have to say, or even dialectically, because they talked about the relationship they had with the local people and what they had learned from them. And we met quite a few intellectuals who talked about peasants who were so thrilled to have them in the countryside. They didn't want them to do physical labor. They wanted them to teach their kids.
Right.
They recognized they had something to offer, and they were really happy to have them. They themselves, when they returned to the city, talked about the importance of policies that would protect the peasantry, because they had formed these relationships, and they continued to go back and have those relationships with the peasants.
Right.
So to me, that was one of the great gains of the Cultural Revolution. It was really important. What I'm wondering about is, what I found was many intellectuals seem to have taken the idea that the Cultural Revolution revealed that China wasn't ready for democracy, that people were too ignorant, and there was a kind of suggestion that that was workers and peasants who weren't really ready. They knew that young Red Guards were involved in a lot of the violence and this sort of thing, but still, there was a kind of an after effect. I actually think you can even go back to land reform and talk about the violence of land reform and the lessons that people learned from that as well, and the failure to sort of face up to the problem of the violence and its after effects, and the whole business about bloodline and all that crap that came out in the Cultural Revolution. But I've lost my train. I'm very sorry. It's just gone. Yes, this question of democracy, the capacity for democracy. Have you seen it? Like when you've gone home to your own village and people are making decisions about planning where they want to go and ideas about the future and this sort of stuff. I wrote this actually in my own dissertation, that I saw the most beautiful examples of democracy in action among these so-called uneducated peasants.
Yes.
And I learned a lot about how people can make decisions, and that's also been true here, even in local meetings or whatever. But I'm curious as to your convictions about that possibility, because I think anybody who thinks you're not capable of democracy is not going to try to build it. And when I say democracy, what I have in mind is a socialist transformation in which you actually do have a whole emancipated population that is trying to follow some kind of vision of where they want to go.
Yeah. Well, I can't agree more, because, and speaking of this, I debate endlessly when I was at CUC teaching. In one event, one student, a doctoral student, said, the peasants, the illiterate, are incapable of democracy. And the example is, a beggar won't know anything. I said, okay, first, your idea about democracy seems to be very narrow. It's about, electing your president, right? So somebody illiterate might not know who Hillary Clinton is or something like that. But if you talk about democracy on an everyday basis, I said, okay, you go ask the street people. They will know where to put a toilet, where to put, what fountain. Isn't that also about democracy, right? And also another thing is, why do you know that these people won't know about high politics? So I think it's the elitist assumption about the people not being able to have democracy. That thought itself, that's a problem, rather than the actual people who don't know what to do with their life. And I think in China, the elitist notion has always been so strong. And I think that's very prevalent among the intellectuals. Among the Cultural Revolution, yes, right-wingers, I think some among them really have serious ideas about themselves being, more superior. So I think, again, throughout the last 30 years, and yes, someone was saying that, well, the reason China ended up in 78, 79, end up, going through this reform phase is because the workers won't cherish what they have gained. Or the peasants at that point were not ready to defend the collective land ownership. There's some lesson there. But I think now, after more than 30 years, for example, in rural areas, a lot of farmers have understand the importance of land ownership, and many begin to appreciate, reappreciate the need for collective or some form of communal support. So I can't agree more, but in terms of where I see that, it's not easy to see the local elections. There are instances where indeed, some farmers will sell their electoral tickets for, some small bribe. This kind of situation still happens, but I think gradually that's going to go away. Yes.
I'll be very quick. Thank you,
Okay,
Zhao.
Daniel.
I have a very quick question, and that is, at this stage of your career and life, what are you frustrated about in terms of the debates that's going on? Going to China, coming back to a narrative that you so eloquently described as a very sort of unipolar and Western-centric. So what are some of those frustrations that you are faced with today?
Good question. Frustrations, one is, the inability to, have to be the kind of the native informant forever. Repeatedly. I'm glad that nobody asked me about censorship question yet. It's what about censorship? And even worse, the kind of racism that has gone so far as to, because I'm from China, and because I've read about censorship, I must be for censorship. Can you believe this? But this comes from the most, friendly circles, most critical circles. So the kind of deep-rooted racism and even red baiting, as if China is still red. Yeah, maybe, but the kind of very, very deep fear. And so I won't say, some people told me that, it's not my own I learned someday that it's not my responsibility to teach others about their racism. But this frustration, I think, I won't say, sometimes I get over with it. I say, okay, I'm not talking about this anymore. I'm just going to China to do my work. But this is a community I feared, I have deep attachment. And I think there's frustration, but there's also excitement. When you see students who can try above and beyond, and when you see students from both sides, like from China, but also from the rest of the world, work together, try to overcome that. So I think overall, I would say that yes, it's been difficult, and I have to be, very careful sometimes. But I feel the space is there to try to go beyond certain wars, basically. That at least I hope. When Ender was introducing Dallas, talking about how he had to flee McCarthyism from the U.S., I always have worried that, one day I don't have to flee certain kind of racism or, some kind of red baiting, so that, I don't know where I will end, because my work, yes, sometimes run into powers that be there. But then there's here, you also have certain kind of, some fear in the air about China rising. And of course, as I say, which way China goes depends on which way we want it to go. Each individual has some responsibility, has something to do. The same way as, if you always say, the peasants are not ready for democracy, then yes, you will suppress that, or you don't create a condition for it. Then you say, in the West, you have the left and the right both say China is the ultimate capitalist country, period. And if that's the case, then what's the point, right? So the point is, it's easy to make that kind of judgment to be politically correct in certain ways. It's more difficult try to do something concrete. One student at a time, one article at a time, one report at a time, one more small little thing at a time. Isn't that the same thing we are doing here, right? And I hope there will be space for us to do here, to do it there. But at this time, I think the worst is, the fear. And also fear can be manipulated so easily because, yes, the job is at stake. Somebody's, the Chinese are stealing our job, all that kind of thing. From home here, our students are coming here, taking up our spaces, all that kind of thing. So that's why I emphasize the need to have internationalism, to have the kind of spirit that Dallas Smythe and his generation has. Yeah.
I'm interested to know what is your prescription for China's development. We've heard a lot of probably socialism from the grassroots up. But what is your prescription now that the claim is that China's development model probably isn't working and isn't going to work? So what should it do?
Well, that is the what to be done question, right? I would say, okay, coming from a China experience, I would say I will ask you what is your prescription after what you have heard from mine. Because there was a time when Chairman Mao can wave the hand, everybody follow, right? So Chairman Mao's prescription is everybody's to follow. That model is not going to work, right? So to ask me about my prescription, I feel humble. I can't answer, really. I say, okay, I show you this is my action. I have believed in, for example, have made this statement on ecological socialism, consensus on ecological socialism, and I have certain ideas that work together with my colleagues. We talk about the need to pursue certain objectives, ideas of equality, all that kind of thing. But then in terms of my prescription, as I say, it's better to leave everybody to say, what is your prescription, right? What would you do, rather than ask me what I do. Because I believe in individual agency. Grand plans can be one single person's plan. And I think if there's one lesson from China or the Mao era, during the Cultural Revolution, even though Mao tried to provoke or start a Cultural Revolution and he think he might be able to maintain control, in the end you can't. Yeah, I think I'm going to disappoint you with my prescription. Oh, one more frustration here is when I write in Chinese, I wish, I have English versions. When I write English, I wish I have Chinese versions, and that's not going to work. So I wish I can show you can you read Chinese? No, doesn't matter. I wish I can show you my consensus on ecological socialism. That's my prescription. But it needs to be translated into English. Can somebody do that? But it wasn't mine. It's a group of small group of people.
I think on that invitation for us to come up with our own approaches to transforming the world and contributing to our communities is an excellent place to stop. I would like to thank Zhao very, very much. Thank you very much, Zhao, indeed.
Thank you, thank you. Wow, this is very special. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for coming.